Hi, I'm Natalie. My research question is, has the Racial Discrimination Act 1975 positively contributed in changing the attitudes of Australians towards the indigenous? The question addresses the positive contribution of the Racial Discrimination Act 1975 in attitudinal changes among Australians towards the indigenous. It is therefore valid as it directly affects the people of Australia, the minority group, and the implementation of the policy through public administration avenues. The question further seeks to identify a relationship between the act towards the indigenous and the effect it has on the Australian nationals. The aim of this research is therefore to determine the role of the Racial Discrimination Act 1975 in the positive change of attitudes among Australians towards the indigenous over the present decade. Literature has contributed to the policies that the Australian government has put in place to address minorities. The presence of related literature will be significant in answering the research question appropriately and completing the research in a timely manner. The question of the positive contribution of the Racial Discrimination Act 1975 on the attitudinal change of Australians has however not been specifically addressed by many scholars. Most literature addressed the Australians' attitudes towards minorities and the cause of the attitudes. This research question, however, particularly seeks to determine the positive relationship between the Racial Discrimination Act and the change of attitudes by Australian nationals towards this minority group. So my theory is the Racial Discrimination Act 1975 has positively enhanced the attitudes of Australian nationals towards the indigenous. And my hypotheses are: number one, the positive focus by Australian nationals on the plight of the indigenous is a result of policy of Racial Discrimination Act 1975 towards better treatment of all individuals. Number two, better treatment of the indigenous by Australian nationals is a result of the positive contribution of the Racial Discrimination Act 1975 towards discrimination policy. Number three, when Australian nationals consider the indigenous as an important part of the Australian community, it reflects on the positive contribution of the Racial Discrimination Act 1975 towards discrimination policy. Number four, the recognition of the indigenous in Australia by Australian nationals has been enabled by the Racial Discrimination Act 1975. The theory and the hypotheses suggested are falsifiable as the Racial Discrimination Act 1975 may have resulted to either negative and positive attitude changes or no attitude changes among different Australians upon the indigenous. The opinions of a sample of diverse Australians and present literature are therefore necessary in validating or disputing the theory and the hypothesis. There is diverse literature on policies that the government has put in place to increase or reduce the status of minorities. Furthermore, literature addresses how minorities used to be treated attitude-wise in the past and how this has changed in the present in different ways. This data is valuable in the answering of the research question to determine the positive effect of the discrimination policy upon Australian nationals' attitudes on the indigenous. Thank you.